of a fetus, there's tissue up under the skin. There's a layer of skin. The thicker it is, the more it's correlated with Down syndrome. You've seen Down syndrome children, you have a thicker neck or a shorter neck sometimes, but you can pick that up with that screening test plus just biochemistry markers. So they want to know, is that scan early on going to tell you something? Is it better than waiting 18 months to figure out what's going on? So that's what it is as a procedure. Okay, so the question, for pregnant women, is nuchal translucency ultrasound plus serum biochemistry testing in the first trimester as accurate, that is, with equal or better sensitivity and specificity as conventional amniocentesis for diagnosis of trisomy 21? So again, pregnant women, the population, interventions, nuchal translucency ultrasound plus serum biochemistry. The comparison is conventional amniocentesis, and the outcome is accurate diagnosis of Down syndrome, which is trisomy 21. Okay, so it's just kind of basic, you know, to me. Now, evidence. Once the question's defined, you have to find evidence, and there's lots of evidence out there, some good, some bad, some more reliable than others. Have any of y'all ever had a drug literature course? I just keep poking around to figure out what's kind of in your backgrounds. Anybody dealt with literature sources and what's good or bad about them in a comparative sense? Probably not specifically that way. Have you ever had, you're saying?
I mean, not specifically, but like in a roundabout manner, yes.
Yeah, so look at it. It's a whole science. Like medical librarian, it's a whole thing to figure out what are these databases and where they come from and what's pros and cons about them. It's more than you're ever going to actually be able to possess, but they're very helpful to work with because they know things that we need to know. So let's look at the types of evidence that are out there. And I will tell you, as the year goes along, some of these, you'll get a chance to look at some of these types of evidence because we bring them out in different ways at different times. So it's again, this is just definitions of things you get to work with in more detail later. Systematic reviews focus on a clinical topic and answer a specific question. An extensive literature search is conducted to identify studies with sound methodology. They're reviewed or assessed for quality, and then they're summarized according to predetermined criteria of the review question. So systematic reviews might have anywhere from 5 to 500 studies, and they will set up the criteria for enrollments. You got to be people who are older than 20, people who take drug A, people who have certain risk factors, and then they'll look at what drug, some intervention, and then they'll see. So everything that meets those criteria, they'll dump them into the pot, and then they'll review them in some way. So systematic review can be many, many articles at one time. We'll go until 2:30. I'll let y'all take a break, and then we'll kind of run around. Y'all need to do. Kind of stand up, run, jump. Okay. Okay. So that's systematic review. So here it is. You've got a whole bunch of studies. They go through a systematic review process, and then you write the systematic review. Okay. Another type of big bunch of studies is a meta-analysis. Has anybody here ever worked with a meta-analysis? Have you ever heard of it? Okay, I've heard of it. Do you ever work with it? You ever done one? You done one?
I have no, I worked with it.
Okay, but you've seen the results of it. Yeah, you'll see. It's pretty complicated. Is anybody in this group a public health graduate?
Well,
Okay.
grad, no.
No, but you've had classes. Public health people a lot of times will be involved in meta-analysis because they're usually looking at lots of information, big groups of people, and they're trying to figure out things about the population as a whole. But a meta-analysis looks at a number of valid studies on a topic, identifies a common measure of effect size, like how effective is a treatment to produce or change some outcome. The results are combined mathematically, very complicated formulas. It's called meta-regression technique, to report the results as if they were derived from a large study. What they do is they take a bunch of studies, they take the numbers from those studies, and they combine them. So that instead of having one study of 20,000 people, they might have 30 of 500 each that meet certain criteria, and then they combine the outcomes of all those studies. And you have to be a statistician to get into it. I'm not a statistician like that, but to get into it, but they combine the results. So they have to have a certain type of criteria coming in, certain numbers, certain statistical tests, certain outcomes. And if those meet all the preconceived parameters, then they will include that study in the project, and then they mathematically combine those numbers, and they will give you a bigger number. So when you see big recommendations, meta-analysis of all the studies in hypertension have shown X, that's what they're doing. They didn't do a study of 30,000 people, but they combined a bunch of little studies together to get a bigger number overall of something going on. This just looks at it again. Systematic reviews are broader. Meta-analysis is narrower because you are taking a lot of studies, but they have to have preconceived, they have to have predefined criteria to be chosen before you look at them. Okay. So here's just one more way to look at it. The big circle is all reviews. There's a bunch of them out there. Inside that big set of all reviews done are a certain group called systematic reviews. Those are studies that have been selected that meet certain criteria entering into the process, okay? Certain type of population, certain people, certain drug treatment, etc. Systematic reviews with meta-analysis is this circle within inside that. So you have all the features of a systematic review, except this time you have statistical criteria that bring them in, to the study. And then even smaller inside of all of this is individual patient data meta-analysis. That's a smaller group, but also maybe you have a bunch of different people where you take their data and kind of group them together as a whole. Okay. Let's stop. This is a good place just to break right here. Run around 10 minutes. I'll get us out of here probably about 30. Okay? That's the goal. And that would be a good one.
That's me too. Thanks for making that outline. I'm gonna use that. You're doing I can't figure that out.
Do like those two things, or but more specifically? Okay. Okay.
So those are the two disasters.
Okay. And then identify how elements of given clinical scenarios align. Okay,
The
so,
PLCO, what's the P, what's the I, what's the C, what's
okay,
the...
so just these
Yes.
examples.
It is so straightforward, you have to be crazy not to do it. I know, it's too simple.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yep, that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
I was like, did I miss them? Did we? Okay, but yeah, the straightforward one.
They're very straightforward.
Okay,
It's not, we're not, they're not, if I were to ask you something on an exam, if I gave you a scenario and said, what's the comparison, what's the this, what's the that, then, they'll identify, but I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so you'd give us something like that, and then you'd be like,
Yeah,
what's the comparison?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
That's
definitely.
It's going to be on the test midterm.
Medical terminology, it will be internal, the doctor will test the session, and she'll give you, no, this is not, on midterm, she will be, if she's already given you stuff to look at, and she'll probably give you some additional comments when she's down here, mostly tomorrow, she's teaching, it'll be just what she just said, we won't be bringing other things in. This will be on this content will be on exam 5, 2 weeks from today. Okay? And I'll go again with y'all in detail what should be on the test. Because we got, now we're kind of moved out, now you figured out what that was all about. Now we're moving into different phase and stuff. But I've got the inside your D2L site, I put objectives up for the presentation, and that's all I want you to be able to. Yes, so the objectives are very precise for this presentation, okay?
Kathleen, have you had that drink yet?
What?
Have you had that drink yet?
Oh, yeah.
You're like, which one?
They're very straightforward.
Oh, yeah. I went
Yeah, you're
to
welcome.
Stillwater
You
on
can
Saturday, went to a concert.
Oh, that's right, I forgot. What concert did you go to?
William Clark Green and.
You did? I was there.
No way! Are you serious?
Yeah, that's one of, William Clark Green is my boyfriend's favorite. He absolutely loves it. They were really
It
good.
was so good and they played so long. It was awesome.
It was packed.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh, my friend, she's so funny. This guy tried to like cut through us and get ahead of us. And my friend's like, what are you doing? And he's like, my girlfriend's up there. And his girlfriend is right behind them. And she's like, oh really? And he's like, okay, sorry.
It was so packed. Did you buy your tickets like previous? Yeah. Me too. The line to like actually enter this.
I know.
Were the
I
gates.
know. Did you guys go anywhere afterwards?
No. We had some friends that went out to the strip, but I was tired.
I was too.
I was so tired. It was fun.
That was a lot. It was so good. Did you get any free stuff?
No.
Did you not stay till the very last one? So I think that last one is like, oh, a couple people have left, but like, anyone who's still here, go over to the merch booth and get something free. Anything you want, one thing free.
William Clark Green did?
The first job was like, go get a koozie, or no, William Clark Green was like, go get a koozie or a CD for free. And then Josh Allen was like, you know what? Anything you want, go get one for free. And they're like,
Did you
really?
say Josh Allen met him?
What?
Did you meet Josh Allen?
No, at the concert. She was at the same concert.
Stop it.
Yeah, so, but then by the time like we got over the line, so I was like,
No, we
and
left
they
early.
probably were out of like t-shirts and stuff.
How far? We left early. They were like, I was kind of disappointed because there's so many people that took hands. That's my favorite part.
It was so fast.
We literally, I don't know where we like danced and like swayed.
Yeah.
We like kind of like two said music and went. Oh, that's good. We'll have to go.
Yeah.
I go with her. She's good.
That's like
I tried to go. If there's somebody that I know, I will take her. Yeah. Did you go? He was at the.
No, what dogs.
He was in Oklahoma City last year. Did he go to Outlaws or did he go to?
Oh, yeah.
There's some place that he
It doesn't look like.
I know. I heard he was at Grace and it was a good show.
Yeah, I wanted to go, and I was like, shouldn't go out to my first that's the first time I watched it.
It's gonna be 2 weeks worth of material.
Now I know I can.
It's not that bad. Getaways. I'm up there. No, he's the issue. Oh, he's from the same town. So I'm up there.
You have to just let them get used to everything. If you try to if you make a move on it, try to reach out too fast, that's not going to work. He's actually very smart.
City sugar spot. Get the crowd spot.
It's like keto and
You know? Yeah, it's so much going into it. We get the first class. Y'all see the weeds, but now this one, there's I took
Sometimes I'm smart.
and I gave this to the doctor, and I gave this to the tail ladies before this next meeting. Outbuilding built at our house, and this is, there's a city top of marijuana because it was, so Dr. Taylor, while we were looking at all this picture's too good to pass. And I brought it back and I told him, I said, okay, Dr. This is what property. I said, we're back.
Well, I mean, it would have been fun if I
Mine
knew.
was big. Yeah, mine was big, and I was
And then we tried to watch it.
Probably
And take another photo. We couldn't do that. It would have been a problem.
Compared to this.
I just ordered a new pencil. It's just plain, like,
That was a big one.
Yeah, I just got plain black. Supposed to be here today, actually. Because look how nasty mine is. In there. And it's broken up here. It's cracked. Huh?
That's why I got a new one.
Yeah, I looked at some like that, but I just decided to get a dark color because I get the stock market is like dropping a lot. Huh? I don't
I didn't have you for my coat yet. They were on my mom's camera. And I was like, wow. Excuse me, guys. I'm going the wrong way. Next time, I don't have to focus on me now.
I'm so sick of my phone. Like, they remove them this day. And always puts me and my ex. Like, I don't want to remember this day. I like the way I picture my friends. One of them got a promotion and had our name. It's like, his name is Billy, but people call him Billy. And it was like a Valentine's Day date party. So you had to wear the we honestly just wanted to see. But then, like, on his birthday, I always borrow because I have to buy something. But his birthday was on February 1st. That was.
Hey, we're getting started!
Freedom. She's pretty good. All right, are you allowed? It's okay. It's a unique talent. I can do it. I'm not ready to do it just yet, but don't provoke me. Don't keep me going. All right. Okay, so we looked at systematic reviews, we looked at meta-analysis. And meta-analysis is just a subset of systematic reviews because it defines entry criteria of statistics, and then they are combined to give you a more powerful review of some topic. Randomized controlled clinical trials, RCT, this is the gold standard for evidence. That has been for as long as we've had trial evidence. They're carefully planned experiments. They introduce a treatment or exposure and then look at people over time. So it's forward-looking. We do something, it's prospective, a prospective randomized clinical trial. So we define our populations, we do something to some, we don't do something to others, and we look at them at a certain point in time in the future and say what happened. There's some methods that are used to eliminate bias. One is randomization. People have an equal chance of falling in either one of the groups. So randomization is always a positive feature. And then blinding, single or double blinding. Single blinding is when the patient does not know what's happening to them, and double blind is when the patient doesn't know what's happening and the provider doesn't know what's happening. Because when providers know what they're doing to somebody, they can still subtly interject attitudes about medicines if their medicines are supposed to affect some more subjective outcome of some sort. So double blind, randomized, double blind, and then placebo controlled. I don't have it up here, but those tend to be the strongest types of studies because you have pulled out every kind of bias you could pull out when looking at a treatment. The randomized controlled trial methodology lets you compare an intervention with a control group. It's good evidence and considered to be gold standard. And here's what it looks like just in the picture. You got a study population at random. People, see here's some blue and green people up here, here's some blue and green people down here. And you do randomization just to be sure that you sprinkle around factors that could influence outcome in both groups. You don't really know when you go into a study what is in the tank of a person or what's going to be pertinent, but if you have an equal chance to put people in both groups, then hopefully you have mixed those parameters that can affect outcome equally between the two groups so that they are accounted for. Then you do a treatment or nothing, and then you follow them up, and then you compare the results. It's that type of thing. So RCT is prospective by nature. You control your groups, you randomize them, you do the intervention or no intervention, follow them over time, see what happens. Cohort studies identify a group of people who already have, or who are already taking a particular treatment, have an exposure or a disease, follow them forward over time, and then compare their outcomes with a similar group that has not been affected by the treatment or exposure or disease being studied. Okay? The subjects are selected by some defining characteristic or characteristics suspected of being a precursor to or risk factor for a disease or health effect. They are observational and not as reliable as randomized controlled trials, since the two groups may vary in ways other than in the variable under study. The picture is probably more helpful than all of the words. So you've got a group of people exposed, not exposed. Maybe it's like Agent Orange. Any of you in here veterans? Y'all know veterans? Vietnam War veterans, one of the huge things that continues to go on is Agent Orange. Y'all ever heard that agent before? It's one of those chemicals that they sprayed in the jungles to kind of kill all the leaves off so they could kind of find people hiding out. And it was just sprayed everywhere in Vietnam, and so soldiers got sprayed just like trees got sprayed, and it had many, many health consequences over time. But early on there wasn't any notion that Agent Orange was a problem. And the government, of course, did not want it to be a problem, because if it's a problem, then there's a liability in there. And so there was a lot of this denial, not looking at stuff, not wanting to mess with it. And I worked in the VA back in the mid to late 80s up into the 90s a little bit, and Agent Orange was still going on. And that was about Vietnam ended in 74, 75, so that was about 10 years out. And then, so it was still being argued about, is it a problem? And the other issue was, how long do you have to go after being exposed to Agent Orange before something shows up? A lot like sometimes when you have something that's carcinogenic, the cancer isn't going to happen the next day because you breathed in something. It might have to sit there, for a long time. So the Agent Orange thing still goes on, and there was eventually a whole big government-funded program after a lot of pushback from people that you're trying to cover up that I was exposed to deadly chemicals, in a jungle somewhere. So here's a case, let's say you did that. You had the exposed, the Agent Orange Vietnam people, and then you had a bunch of people who were somewhat like them that weren't exposed. You follow them over time. Okay, let's say this group has leukemia, like I'll get out, and this group has leukemia, but not at the same rate. Then you kind of can say, in the cohort, two groups that may or may not have the same deal. You've got an exposure, non-exposure, see what happens, and then you kind of quantify what the outcomes are. So that's another way to look at it. Case control are studies in which patients who already have a specific condition are compared with people who do not have the condition. And then you go backwards. See, randomized controlled trial is prospective. You set your groups up and then you go forward over time to see what happens. In the cohort, you find a group of people with quote-unquote some exposure that might have meaning, and a group of people who don't have that exposure that might have had meaning, and just walk them up over time and just measure outcomes, what's going on in that population. In this group, you've got case control. Okay, let's take all the people who have leukemia and a group that don't, and then let's go back and see what's in their past that might have led you up to this. So it's a backward-looking type of a study, case control. The researcher looks back to identify factors or exposures that might be associated with the illness. Researchers often rely on medical records and patient recall for data collection, which obviously introduces bias and problems in our memories. We don't remember stuff the same way. And then these types of studies are often less reliable than randomized controlled trials in cohort, because showing a statistical relationship does not mean that one factor necessarily caused the other. So even if you had a group with some bad disease up here and a group that didn't have it, and then you went back over time to see what all they were exposed to, and then you try to make links, you're trying to correlate exposure with outcome, maybe you got the wrong one. Maybe there's another factor inside the tank that actually explains it better. So it's kind of helpful at the beginning to identify issues, but not, you really don't know. It's kind of like, they looked at, mercury and salmon or tuna. That's a whole big thing. Are we being mercury exposed? So they figure out, they look at people who have certain kind of paresthesias or neurologic problems. They go back to see, well, did you have this or did you have that? Maybe that caused it. It still doesn't make it caused it for sure, but it's potential. Cigarettes were like that. People who smoke cigarettes, and people who had cancer, did you smoke cigarettes? You have lung cancer, did you smoke cigarettes? No. So they go back looking, and for a long time there's lots of folks denying that cigarette smoking actually causes respiratory disorders. I know that in 2018 it's hard to believe that that was the case, but up into the mid-60s there was this total denial that actually that was a problem. It was actually romanticized in commercials. I mean, smoking was cool, and there was no thought. Then the Surgeon General forced labeling on the packages so that people were more aware, but tobacco industry's got a lot of money, and they didn't want that out there. Even today, they will argue with you about some of the health hazards of smoking. You would almost think if it's so bad, why don't we even let it exist? But alcohol, that can be bad for some people. Why would we let that exist? Drugs, man, why would we let that exist? It's like some things are illegal. Like I make the case on marijuana and cigarettes and alcohol. It's more like social historical than it is some operating principle. If we know that something caused a health hazard, shouldn't it be not allowed? Well, there's too much industry built up in cigarettes and alcohol. And alcohol per se is not necessarily bad. It's, excessive and inappropriate use can be a problem in some people. So it's great. Marijuana might be the same thing, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an advocate. I have a lot of views about it, but it's not necessary to reveal what I think. But I think the arguments are very similar. That cigarettes can exist. Why can't marijuana exist? If cigarettes are bad, why don't we ban them like we're not allowing something else to exist? So I don't think that society is very consistent about what it says. I'm a health promoter. I'm for health. If something is not good for health, then I'm not going to advocate it. I'm not going to go change the world legally because there's more forces and powers in motion than we think, but you can speak your mind when your time comes up. And as a healthcare provider, you will have to make a lot of decisions about what are good behaviors and not based on information that's available. And are you going to speak for something that is for health improvement and to prevent bad health outcomes, or are you not? That's just part of becoming a practitioner. It will absolutely operate in your universe. What do you think about this? So you have to kind of think about what you think about it because it will have weight somewhere. Okay? but I'm not going to tell you what you should think. I will give you a lot of things to think about, but you eventually have to come to your conclusions about it. And I don't think it's a clean story. It's kind of gray, kind of gray. Okay, here's Cohort Study. You've got the exposed and the unexposed, and then you go back in time to see what, in Cohort, you've got exposed, unexposed, go forward and look at incidents. Case control, they got the disease or the non-disease, you go backwards to see what they might have been exposed to. Okay. Case reports and case series, a little bit lower down the totem pole. Case report, a detailed report of diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up of an individual patient. And it usually contains demographic data such as age, gender, and ethnicity. So if you have a rare disease and you have decided to treat it some way and you got a good outcome, then you're not going to have 5,000 of those. So it's always important to try to publish what worked for that one. And you will see that for a lot of more rare diseases, case studies, N of 1. You've heard that, an N of 1. Okay, N of 1, there's only one case I'm working on, but I did do this and here's how it turned out. That might be helpful for somebody else out there. So do that, it's the case report. Case series is a series of case reports involving patients who were given similar treatment and containing pertinent demographic and therapeutic data. Because there are reports of cases and they use no control groups to compare outcomes, they have little statistical validity. I'll give you an example of a case series that's been kind of popular over time. At least it's a good example. It usually case series happens in rarely occurring phenomena or ones that are very hard to measure objectively and lock it down. Back in the day, I used to really be interested in diabetic neuropathy, this burning feet pain or pins and needles or stabbing because it is so totally disruptive to the person who has it. I remember going through all the literature trying to figure out what do you use to treat this? How do you make this get better? What actually works? And there was just a whole hodgepodge of things that were used. And today there's a whole hodgepodge of things used. Everybody thinks gabapentin is it, but well, maybe not. But it's very hard to treat. And the reason that there's nothing good is that it's very difficult to quantify equivalent level of disease. And the nature of the disease is such that it waxes and wanes. You might go through a 3-week period where you don't have any pain at all in your feet. And you may go through a phase where they're like burning fire every day. And then you'll go from burning fire to nothing at all. And then you go back to another way. Okay, if you're using a drug to treat that person and you put them on it, and all of a sudden they go through that 3-week phase of nothing, did the drug do it? Or was that just going to happen anyway? Or you put them on a drug and then they go to burning fire and you say, this doesn't work. Does it? Or what is it? You don't know. So case series are those types of things. We use Dilan, we use Tegretol, we use amitriptyline, we use gabapentin, and they describe it, but it's very difficult to get a good study going forward because of the variation of the disease. You would have to have thousands of people in both groups to actually prove a difference, and you probably aren't going to find it. So case reports are helpful. Case series are probably a little more helpful, but in the end, they don't have the weight of proven science just because of the limitations going in. Here's your evidence pyramid. Okay, from the bottom, the least help to the top of the pyramid, which is good stuff. Okay, we didn't do animal lab studies because we do human medicine, but actually, the animal studies are foundational. When you look at treatments for humans, particularly pharmacologic treatments, they have to go through an animal phase of testing. And that's a big phase. And if you don't find the right kinds of outcomes or you find significant toxicities, they may never move to the human phase. So they're out there and they are absolutely required by the FDA. And every drug company does tremendous amounts of animal testing, toxicology studies, other kinds of studies that they have to forward to even get applications to even check it in a human before you go on. So they're at the bottom. Okay, case report or case series, narrative reviews, expert opinions, editorials. There is no design in those studies. They are just reporting what you've done the best you can with what you have. Okay, so they're here. The next step up, case control and cohort, are both considered observational studies, and we combo with randomized controlled trials. These are all primary studies. The case control, subjects have the outcome of interest and you look for the risk factor. It's retrospective. Cohort is prospective. One is exposed to a risk and you observe to see what happens over time. They have a little more weight. Case control, lesser than cohort. Then you move up to randomized controlled trial, which is prospective and tests the treatment. Then you move up to meta-analysis because it combines a whole bunch of results of randomized controlled trials, and those actually then form the basis for clinical practice guidelines. So that's where they come from. It emerges out of all of this evidence, more and more consistent and concise and valid, all the way up to a practice guideline. And these are considered secondary, pre-appraised, or filtered studies because they've already been done, and then they've been batched against certain criteria and then massaged to create the statement that we use in practice. Does that make sense to y'all? Just it's looking at ways to get information and how credible it is towards a clinical practice guideline. Levels of evidence. I only want you to understand that first definition, and that's it. And I will actually kind of wean through some of these slides. Have any of you ever read clinical practice guidelines? Have you ever looked at any of them? You're going to get your shot. If your answer is no, don't worry, you're going to get your shot at it. Clinical practice guidelines can be tedious, but they will list out things that you should do. Diagnostic studies, treatments, etc., monitoring over time. And they will put all this stuff out in a logical flow, and beyond each statement they give you, they will put down the level of evidence in parentheses. It's either high-grade evidence that makes us do this, or it's a little bit lower grade. So we're saying we think you should do this, and this has the weight of a meta-analysis. Or we think you should do this is our best information, but it's not as strong as this other statement we just made. So they rank how strong the recommendation is based on how strong the evidence is behind it. And all of these studies will have a whole bunch of scales of the level of evidence, but the principle is the same. They're arranged, they come up with a ranking system to describe the strength of results measured in a clinical trial or a research study. I gave you some agencies, you don't have to remember them, but there's agencies that actually define levels of evidence. A U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, Oxford Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, Canadian Task Force. I just gave you some names. You don't have to remember those. But agencies try to define what is considered a level of evidence at a certain point. And it can vary a little bit. Let me just show you some stuff just for fun. Like USPSTF levels of evidence. They have level 1, level 2, level 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and then level 3. Okay, level 1 would be the highest level of evidence. Level 3 is the least. Okay, level 1, just to show you, level 1, obtained from at least one properly designed randomized controlled trial. So they're going with the gold standard. The strongest conclusions may be drawn by applying the appropriate statistical tools to interventions in which clinical trials are randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, drawn from a homogeneous population of sufficient sample size to provide statistical power. Okay, so that's your best evidence. Let's go to 3 just to show you the other end. Level 3 is an opinion of respected authorities based on clinical experience, descriptive or reports of expert committees. Okay, there's no real evidence. It's just we think it's this way because we've all done it for 10 years this way and we think this is the best way. So that's the lower end. Then if you come back up, like level 2.2, evidence is obtained from well-designed cohort or case controlled. A little bit stronger. Evidence is obtained from well-designed controlled trials without randomization. So it's just they just stack it based on where the evidence came from, what was the design. I don't care that you can remember all this stuff. I just need you to understand what levels of evidence mean. It's the weight based on the significance of the studies and the designs that were used. Okay, finding the evidence. Okay. I wanted to let y'all know that y'all can go to the Bird Library at OUHS. Did y'all know that? I don't think she told y'all that when she was here. You can go there because citizens of Oklahoma, and any of you who are living here now are now a citizen of Oklahoma, can use that library, and they have several things in there. Up-to-date, PubMed, Cochrane collaboration, Embase Medline, and you get libraries to help you. They do, when you go to that library and you have your laptop, there's a way to log on as a guest so that you can access databases. So if you ever get to a place where you need to find something and you can't find it through the Oklahoma City University databases, which are actually pretty good databases, then you can always go there, take your computer, operate in your zone. You can't access it from outside unless you're a student, but if you go sit there, you can be a guest in the environment. And it's actually a pretty good place. Okay, I am not doing any of these things. I'm not doing that today. I promise you. Okay, it's okay. It's not, we don't need to do that today. I wanted to bring up several other issues related to EVM in practice, and these may be more important than anything else we talked about, is trying to frame it better. Here, the issues and problems you'll have with evidence-based medicine is finding information, just finding stuff easily. Access to databases costs money. You can't just get stuff. You can't just get Medline. You can't just get, PubMed unless you want to pay for it online. You can pay for anything online and get into it, but it costs. And so that's a barrier for some people. Some places give you access as a benefit of your workplace. If you work in a hospital or you're in a big clinic system where they can afford stuff, then that might just be part of your environment and your benefit for working there. If you're in a very small office, you may not have anything, and so you can't find information. So as time goes by, it's harder to get all the scientific stuff you would like. That's the reason why a lot of individuals end up being preceptors in educational programs, because once they become an adjunct preceptor, they can be viewed as a faculty member and they can access stuff. That's one of the benefits. I know when I was at UHSC, that was one of your biggest sell points. When people, they wanted that library, they wanted to access it from the outside world in, but they didn't live anywhere near here to go over there. And frankly, you want it in the middle of the day. You don't want to take a Saturday to go find out your clinical problem. You've had enough. So you need it in real time where you sit. So if you have those, if you're preceptors, then that gives you email access, which allows you to have an account in the library, which means you can get in. So that will be something for you to think about when you get out of here, is there are some benefits to being involved in student education. It gives you access to stuff that you can't get. Okay. Value of clinical guidelines. They're very important and very helpful. What you will find in Oklahoma is that guidelines are valued by some and not by others. Some people, I find a lot of times, we will teach you straight therapy. What is the way to do stuff? What is the scientific way to do stuff? What is right and appropriate? And you will go out on a rotation and they will do what they do. And you're going to be comparing, they do what they do versus what we're taught. And then they're going to go, well, that's what we do out here. And they'll have an attitude about it. And it'll be like, well, maybe you shouldn't have an attitude about it. Maybe there's other ways to look at it. But in my experience, we do this. I'm not against you. I'm not against your experience. I'm not against anything. But, and this is a big but, you run risks. And what is the way we approach them? What are guidelines for? They make, and I'll tell you where they'll come back to, 999 times out of 1,000, you're okay. One time in 1,000, you're not okay. And you do what you do because that's what we've always done, that's what I've seen. Let something go wrong, good luck. They will kill your ass. in a courtroom because they're gonna go, what are you doing? Where is this coming from? Well, that's what we've always done. We don't care. They will kill you. So you have to decide what's safe and effective and acceptable, and you'll have to work with it. And there's gray. I'm not telling you that there isn't, wiggle room for interpretation, but sometimes us is like, that's not a good deal. There's other ways to do it. So you have to take some responsibility for what you know and how, and stay in touch. Okay, sales representatives. If you're a sales representative, do not get mad at me, but I'm going to say the truth here. Sales representatives' job is to sell. Okay, you have to sell. And you sell using information that you know is true about your product. You don't want to be given false information. But it's like anything in the world today. You give your information about your product from your perspective to sell. Are you trying to kill people? No. Are you trying to increase use? Yes. Sometimes what's being sold is the best thing. Sometimes what's being sold is not better than something else. Might be more expensive, but there might be considerations in there that lean it one way or the other. So the sales representatives will come at you quite a bit because they will see you as targets. You are a prescribing target. So they will want you to use their thing. And they will tell you they will give you all the stuff that would favor their product, but they're not going to tell you about other things for other products. Why would you do that? That unsells. It's just there. I've dealt with it for 35 years. And I have outstanding friends who are sales representatives who I find very ethical and work very well within a paradigm, and that I have found others who absolutely work outside the paradigm and are a pariah. Give you an example, a true story. When I worked in the VA, there was a huge battle between the beta-1 specific blockers. Atenolol, Tenormin, metoprolol, low pressure, they're both generic now. The battles are over because once things go generic, there isn't much reason to push for it. But when they're both brand name products in the federal government, if you can get it to lean one way or the other, then you have a huge captive audience of potential users of that product. Well, it was a bloodbath between the sales forces for those two products. And what they did, this is to me the sorriest thing I've ever seen. They gave medical residents $100 each if they would prescribe X number of prescriptions for their product. And they also hosted gambling festivals out there at Remington Track, so they would give them money, gamble, feed them, but they were essentially buying prescriptions, which is, to me, the lowest. It's very highly unethical to do such a thing. So once they got caught, they both got booted out of the building because they were really duking it out. But the residents were like, well, I'm always going to use the Tylenol. I'm always going to use so-and-so. Well, why? What's the reason? Well, this and this. Like, yeah, really, it was this. So a practitioner was taking money, and they felt like, well, there's no big difference in anything. I'm just going to do this, and I give them $100. Please don't be one of those people. You can't be associated with stuff like that. Since that time, there are more and more rules about presence of proprietary information in practice sites, and you'll see a lot of practice sites will give you algorithms of choice for treatments because they're trying to be cost efficient in some ways and also safe. So you see a lot more of that inside facilities than you used to, and there are numbers of ways that limit sales present inside a clinical care area. And it goes back to those types of things that happen. I'm not trying to upset y'all. If you're in sales, I am not saying that sales is a bad thing, but I'm giving examples where pressures to produce a certain way can lead people in paths that are not the best. Okay? And you'll be desirable clients. They'll look at you that way. Okay. Quality of evidence in the first place. This is my last point, then y'all can go home. What is the truth about anything in the first place? right now, people will say, well, we're going to use so-and-so because this medicine has evidence, and that medicine doesn't have the same type of evidence. Okay, who creates evidence? The people who make the product. Government very rarely, you very rarely have independent agencies who will fund the size of trial needed to compare A and B. Here's an example. You might have an antihypertensive medication that costs less than a penny a day. Total prescription for a month would be less than $1, plus whatever markup is needed for the pharmacy part of that. Okay, you got that, very effective medication. Medication over here costs $100 a month, you know, $3 plus per day. That's over here. Who do the $300, you know, who do the $3 a day people compare their drug to? Will they compare it to the pennies a day drug? If they end up being dead even, they just unsold their product. Because why are you going to pay $3 a day, or have your patient pay $3 a day, or have insurance pay $3 a day, which jacks up everybody's rates in the first place, or pennies, you know, less than a penny a day? They will never do that study. So $3 a day compares itself to $2.80 a month, $2.80 a day, and they duke it out, and maybe 3 can win over $2.80 a day, then they get that 20 more cents in their tank and they win. So the evidence available now, and it's more so than ever, the studies are set up with the notion that no matter what we find, we're still in the ballgame. They will not set up studies that absolutely answer the question straight up. Compare the things that I want compared. They will not do it. And those types of studies cost millions and millions of dollars to do. Literally. I mean, it's major. So they are not going to spend millions and millions of dollars to unsell their product. They will spend millions and millions of dollars with a protocol and a design that they can get information out of to win no matter what they get. So, seeking the truth, what is the quality of the evidence? Be skeptical about what they've done. Antibiotic A versus antibiotic B. $10 a day for each one. Fighting it out for market share. I want that compared to penicillin or amoxicillin or something dirt cheap, because that actually helps the economics of healthcare, and it's not out there. So I'm skeptical about evidence-based medicine in the sense that we don't always have the evidence that we want or need to really do the right thing. So well, there's no evidence of that against that drug with that drug. No, and there won't be, because nobody's going to ever do that study. So just be skeptical about it. It's a good thing. Be skeptical about it. I would say always lean towards high-level evidence-based medicine practice, because it is the way we should do stuff, but you will find yourself in a number of scenarios where the evidence does not exist. That would be most helpful. So then you just operate with what they've given you. Okay. Any questions? Kind of interesting though, because it's once you get up underneath what healthcare is, there's many ethical issues up underneath it, many. It's a profit business. Okay. But there's nothing wrong with profit. There's nothing wrong with money. It's not. Okay. Any questions? Go home. Have fun. Relax. Freedom. Okay, well, one last thing. I posted you learning objectives for this material. That is all I will test you on with this content. I will not test anywhere beyond what I've asked. When I put my objectives together, I ask the questions just like I told you need to know. Okay.
So I'm just gonna fill out a list. You did. That nap.
I got a bad number.
I was always gonna do that later,
Not always, but like probably not.
Either I completely